one of the issues that's become sort of a hot button for us is the stories behind both the State Department, USAID, and FEMA that have been basically funding all of the flow of illegals that have come into our country. And not just funding the infrastructure that got them there, but then the infrastructure that processes these illegals and then disseminates them throughout the United States and continues to give them flights wherever they need it, debit cards on the way, et cetera, et cetera. You know, when we first kind of came across this, it was I say, almost a shock to realize that we're the ones that are primarily paying for the flow of illegals into our country, that none of this was organic, that it was being driven, but it was being driven by our own government. And we say that without any hyperbole. In the last just 2 years alone, about $5.5 billion has been spent by the State Department, they're the biggest, USAID number two, and then about $1 billion being allocated by FEMA, all of which to drive the flow of illegals into our country. And it's this idea that you find that it's another example of your government working against you, but this one in some ways was particularly visceral because everybody's screaming and upset about the borders being open, Biden saying he can't do anything about it. And then we find that not only is, of course, that's a lie. Of course, he could change, single executive order could change that. But not only is it that issue, but rather that our own federal agencies are driving that into our country. And it's something that we've been really trying to raise awareness of, with, frankly, I'd say with not a huge amount of success. It seems like all of a sudden it's starting to gain some traction. It was an issue that General Flynn picked up today. Great to see that, or rather last week, pick that up and had that going. And we hope that there's broader awareness of what's exactly transpiring, because I think there's some fundamental issues, like on the criminality side of things, as you're having these people being deported, people start to hear stories about exactly what these people were doing, the crimes that they committed, the ways that they were released. As people start to understand that it was our tax dollars that funded this flow and got these people here in the first place, that's what starts to provoke real outrage and pushback. Just the average man on the street saying, wait a minute, what? I had no idea any of this was going on. And it's those kind of responses that can provoke real change.
Yeah, one of the biggest lies, if we kind of just zoom out here for a moment, which has already been exposed in the few weeks or days of of Trump 47, is the lie of the NGO, the non-governmental organization. Yeah. So what Trump did very, very wisely early on was that he issued this executive order which just cut funding. And the thinking there is very, very smart, because it's how you figure out kind of where the problems are by turning it all off, and then you can figure out which ones you need to turn back on. Whereas if you kind of go through the list, and we're talking about thousands and thousands of organizations that are the recipients of, for instance, USAID money or State Department money or whatever, you'll never get the job done. On each of them, you will hit obstruction and all kinds of problems. And, oh, you can't do this. And, oh, the poor people, and think of the poor children, and on. And it's just not going to happen. So what you do is you just turn off the money spigot altogether. And then you figure out which ones you turn back on. Well, what got exposed by doing that, and by the way, again, I think I already said it, but I think it was absolutely brilliant doing it that way. What got exposed is that all these so-called NGOs aren't really NGOs at all, because they're all complaining that they're out of money and not getting any money. Well, if you were getting money from the government, you were never an NGO to begin with. That's the fact of it. That's the truth of it. That's the core.
NGO, non-governmental institution, organization.
Correct. It's just the whole thing was a lie. Yeah, I mean, the left, the media, and so on, Democrats, they're very good with labels. They give something a label, NGO, and everyone goes, oh, NGO is I'd say, is probably, if you just asked just a random person in the public, most of them would say, yeah, NGO, they do good work. That's charity. That's good stuff, And as it turns out, often it's not good stuff at all. And equally as importantly, They're not NGO at all. They're government funded or controlled or directed or influenced. If any of those things are in fact the case, then it's not an NGO. I mean, I'll come back here to immigration in a moment, but did you see that all these newspapers in Europe and Eastern Europe are crying foul because they've run out of money?
These responses that we've been seeing that are so hysterical and over the top as a result of Trump cutting off the funding is really, really telling. The response is so broad-based that it just, and so hysterical, and so, these emotional appeals. You cut off funding for Meals on Wheels. Chuck Schumer tweeted that one. That at some point people start to scratch their heads and think, wait a minute, how many different things are we actually funding here? And, it becomes apparent that, as you say, with the example of the newspapers, that we're funding all kinds of things that people never thought we were doing. And as to the NGOs, whenever, I don't know about, well, actually, I think I do know about you, but whenever I see the word NGO or the acronym, I immediately think of a government-affiliated entity. It's, as you said, it's anything but non-governmental organization. What it simply is it's an off-the-books form of government. Most of our agencies, they get their overall budget. A lot of it is sort of designated, but they always get kind of a black box portion of their budget that they can do whatever they want with. And they use that to fund these NGOs to carry out the things that they can't legally do. The illegal immigration, constructing the entire infrastructure from Central America all the way up to the United States, is a perfect example of that. That's something they wanted to do, but they couldn't overtly fund it, so they use the NGOs to carry out those orders. And those people blend and blur. Very often, they're the same people that may have been in government at a different point. So, the NGO is just a vehicle for them to accomplish what they can't do legally.
Exactly. And if we come back to immigration here, before we really kind of got into the weeds of this, and I'm looking back perhaps even before we knew each other, a long time ago, it always kind of bugged me. And again, at the time, I wasn't doing any of this. I wasn't doing no podcast, no anything. I was doing legal work. I was teaching law. It had nothing to do with any of these things. But there was one issue that always bugged me, just as a matter of common sense. There is just no. I've traveled in Latin America. I've traveled in South America. I've traveled many, many different places. There is just no way, from a purely practical point of view, that some guy just wakes up one day in Colombia or whatever and says, "Oh, I'm now going to walk to the Mexican border and cross over into the U.S. and I'm going to bring all my family. We're just going to walk," like Forrest Gump and when he went on his epic walk. That doesn't work that way. That doesn't happen. It just simply, that is just completely ludicrous, just the idea. So I was always cognizant of that. It always bothered me. But it wasn't until, a few years ago when we started really looking into it that it became clear what was actually going on, that there were these NGOs, the wrong word again, funding it and facilitating it, having, there are caravans, but they move them. They have these way stations along the way. They facilitate the whole process. And in many cases, and this is one of those where, I kind of fell off my chair. Again, I can't remember exactly when. It would have been during Biden at some point, when I realized that many of them are just flown directly.
Yep.
So, don't even have to do the trek. Don't even have to do the walk that we always see in the media where they say, "Oh, look at these poor people doing the Forrest Gump walk." No, they just put on a plane and just flown in. And then one of those was when we went through it. I noticed El Salvador was on that list. Like, hold on, wait a minute. Nayib Bukele has been president since 2019. That's like the safest country on earth. Why on earth are refugees being flown in from El Salvador? So you could write a whole book about all this the scam. I would just call it a scam. But the bottom line is that no, people do not just wake up one morning and start walking 3,000 miles to the U.S. border. This is a well-oiled machine, and that machine is funded, or has been up until very, very recently, funded by U.S. taxpayers.
And they set up points of origination. You know, you're 100% right when you talk about this not being organic. All the way down in Central America, they set up processing stations where they were literally attracting people and saying, here's kind of a starting kit. We can get you to go. And you get bus. You know, in some cases you get flown, but I think more often they find that they get bused and they take railroads, etc. And at each of these way stations, they're given debit cards with cash. They're given food and water and everything else. So the idea of this arduous trek from, you know, a country far away, 3,000 miles, that's not what's actually going on. It's all an engine designed to put people into the country. And, you know, ultimately what for? Well, probably for votes. Both to distill our Constitution and also for the fact that they think they're going to have a huge influx of the population that's going to end up voting Democrat. But the breadth of the well-oiled machine, I think, was really what took us back, and how much money was being funneled into this. You know, not small amounts. $5.5 billion that we can identify. I'm sure there's much more, but $5.5 billion just over the last 2 years, just coming out of those three institutions. It's crazy.
Yeah, and I think it's not just votes. It's also every time I just have to kind of rub my eyes when I see this, but it's pretty much every day you see this on Twitter, on X, and elsewhere, where people say, well, if you don't allow them to come in, or if you send them home, you know, who's going to pick the crops, or, you know, who's going to deliver the Uber Eats or whatever. I'm like, can you guys hear what you're saying? And evidently not.
No, it's amazing that you hear that argument. And, you know, the issue that they're referring to is something that they created in the first place. That kind of leads us to the number of illegals, you know, how many are actually in this country. And Democrats are famous for, everybody's probably heard it, that there's 11 million illegal immigrants. Well, guess what? They've been using that 11 million number for the past 20 years. And that number didn't just happen organically. It came out of a Pew, however you say it, back in 2005, that determined that it was about 10.9 million. So they rounded up to 11 million immigrants. So we started taking a look at that question, exactly how many immigrants, illegals are in the country. And we have a couple different data points, and I guess it's not necessarily our idea to determine the number for you, but rather provide a background whereby you can see what you think the number actually is. There was a Bear Stearns study that determined in the same year as the Pew study, 2005, they used a very different methodology, but what they determined, and this is for private clients, not for political purposes, they came up with 20 million in 2005. And their methodology is fascinating. We have it in it's linked in our latest article, which you can get on truthovernews.org. And so that's the number they had in 2005. Step forward, you had a Yale study that was done, and that Yale study, which was done by people that were very much on the left, and they admitted to being wildly surprised by what they found, determined that in, I believe it was 2018, that there was somewhere between 21 and 29 million. And they also admit that they used a very, very conservative methodology to arrive at that number. So we know that there was about 10 million that came into the country under Biden. So, you know, where does that put us at? We think it probably puts you around 40 million illegals, a number that is, almost a 4 times multiple over what Democrats have put forth for decades. And you can determine your own number, look at that and kind of walk through and see what makes sense to you. The larger point isn't exactly what we think the number is, but you can see that, you know, what you've been told is completely wrong, and the problem is much, much larger than what you actually think it is.
It's one of those things, again, like with the NGO, where they give something the wrong name, and then everyone is just misled consistently and perpetually. But in this case, I'd say it's that same scheme of theirs with a little different twist, because let's face it, even the number that they keep bandying about, 11 million, is a lot. I mean, that's not just sort of some trifle that we can just ignore. So Just if you came at it as someone who had never looked into any of this, that's probably a big number. It would be very shocking to people. Like, whoa! Like if you ask someone from a country that doesn't have these kinds of problems, they'd say, "You let 11 million in?" It's a big number. But because of it being thrown about for the past 20 years, as you say, it's sort of we're all kind of we've had our senses blunted to it. Oh, okay,
Right.
and just by constantly ramming it in, and as you absolutely rightly say, it's not about whether it's 11 million or 40 million. The point is you can reach your own conclusion as to no one knows what the exact number is. First of all, it's pretty obvious that it's not 11 million if that was the number from 20 years ago, because we've seen what's happened since, and in particular, what happened during Biden. Now, if you look at some of those numbers, and those are official numbers, they were put out by Biden's people in terms of daily encounters, and you were in the many thousands per sector per day. I mean, you can just extrapolate those numbers. It's very simple. So to say that even if we leave everything else aside, they say 11 million. Well, even by what they themselves admit happened during Biden, that number would have ballooned. And that's not even the other study you mentioned is none of those. We don't even have to consider any of those things just by that alone. So it is how they always work. It's how they always put out these false narratives, and then they just hammer it in every single day. They just whip up this story about the 11 million. And at some point, the media, everyone just parrots it, and then that's it. So it's not. It's obviously a lot more. But, the good side is that, we just said in terms of I looked at one of the statistics there. Now, Trump tweeted out that the numbers had gone down by 93% since he came into office. So
You mean the encounters?
The encounters, correct. And then, of course, there was a big media outcry. Oh, my goodness, it's not 93%, it's 60%. I just had to laugh when I saw that. I think it was Time or someone put that out, because even if it's 60, that's still huge in terms of the drop.
You just have to laugh. Like, you just don't hear yourself, do you?
Again, they don't hear themselves. But I did then look into some of these numbers more specifically in terms of, the underlying data. So there was this... The one I came across that really kind of hit home, it was like 4,000 down to was like 200 or something like that. Or maybe it was even less, but, and then of course you are talking about, I think that would be like 95, but not even 93. It's even more than 93%. So I think obviously it's had an effect, just Trump coming into office. And, is it the enforcement? Is it the psychology? It's probably a bit of both.
Yeah, we also aren't just making up that 10 million number. We link to it in the article, and you can look at those numbers, and there's actually a number of links there, so you can kind of keep going more and more. But they come from the Biden administration, so we think that 10 million number is actually on, probably dramatically so on the low side. But you can go see those numbers for yourself. And when you speak to psychology, I think there was probably the sense that we've got a puppet in the presidency. We can do whatever we want. So let's rip the borders open. Let's push everybody in. They're never going to be able to do anything about it. Trump's not going to win again. Whoever comes in, maybe they shut the border down, but they're not going to do anything. This is our opportunity to kind of flood the country, which they did. But they weren't counting on Trump just having the most miraculous of comebacks and coming in with a mandate and the willingness to execute that mandate. And I don't know about you, but the more I see of Homan, the more I like him. He is just blunt, no apologies. We're doing it by the books, but we are not listening to your emotional appeals. They fall on deaf ears. I'm talking about the media. Whenever they try to interview him, who are you going to go after? Well, we're going after the criminals first. If there's somebody else that shouldn't be is here illegally and gets caught up in that, we're going to deport them too. No apologies. Just this is what we're doing. This is our mandate, and we're going to pursue it. And that forcefulness has an impact as well. You talked about psychology. Seeing that has an impact as well. So the numbers are so enormous. They're daunting in some respects. But this idea of just shutting off the flow and starting a reversal, it's an amazing start. And, Trump getting the popular win probably played a big role in that being able to happen. The fact that he does have a mandate and he's executing on it.
And what often gets underestimated is the voluntary repatriation.
Yeah.
Basically, people saying, okay, this is not good. I don't want these people come knocking on my door. I'm just going to go home. I bet you we're going to come back to this here in a few months' time, and a lot of that will have happened. When you're coming back to the 10 million, when you crunch the numbers here, for every day of Biden being in office, that works out as 6,800 entries per day times 1,460. That's how many days he was in office. That gives you 10 million. Just the numbers I was looking at here the other day was many thousands per sector. Now, maybe that was a high day, but 6,800 sounds pretty much, doable or reasonable in terms of the stuff we saw happening. So I think the 10 million is in every way justified. And again, as you say, you can go to our article and kind of dig into the underlying materials there. The other thing that maybe we should talk about is the Guantanamo issue, where the media lost its crap about people being sent there instead of being sent home. Two things about that. It's a typical Trump move and I don't want to diminish the actual subject matter of it, and it's very serious, and there's a good reason for doing it. But let's just start with the psychological side of it. The typical Trump move, the thinking past the sale. The salesman of Trump. Trump comes through here. The real estate mogul and so on. This is his bread and butter. If the media is discussing whether they should go to Guantanamo, they kind of already factor in that, well, they should go home. You go one step further so that they accept the going home part, so long as it's not Guantanamo. So that's part of it. But I think what happened with Colombia here the other week was really important. So they rounded up people who had come from Colombia. Now, normally when you come from a certain country and you get deported or repatriated or whatever the word is that you want to use, you go back to that country. That's how it works. And Colombia said, no, we're not having them. We're not taking them. I mean, it's just completely unreal. But that actually happened. And of course, Trump sent out his tweet about all the things that he was going to do to Colombia. He's actually wielded some of the leverage that the United States has, but rarely wields in this way, where basically every Colombian official was going to be immediately sanctioned by no visa, no this, no that. Tariffs, any Colombian entering the country would undergo some kind of scrutiny, and on and on and on. And they folded like a beach chair, like in 30 minutes or whatever. The president tweeted out, "No, it's fine, right?" But coming back to the Guantanamo issue, if you have countries that don't want their people back, well, what do you do with it? What do you do then? What if they hadn't folded? What do you do then? So the idea that you have to have some kind of facility for this is absolutely correct.
It's also again, kind of going back. Well, first of all, there's a basic question. Why wouldn't a country want its own citizens back? What kind of citizens are those people that a country doesn't want to accept them? And I think that plays into the Guantanamo issue of it. It's obviously also calling a bluff. And if you're one of the people that are potentially subject going to Guantanamo versus going home, what are going to be your choices? I think you're going to be a lot more open to just self-deporting, as we talked about earlier in this matter. So, but there was a lot of gotcha that came out at first with the Colombia president response before Trump, laid the hammer down. And they were kind of gloating about that, but nobody was asking the question, wait a minute, why doesn't the president of Colombia want these people back, their own citizens? What are those citizens doing? And that was just overlooked, and I think that plays a role into the Guantanamo effect. And again, being part of a larger psychological issue that plays in as well, in terms of setting that we're really serious about this. And it's not like deportations have gone in the past. This is going to be a very different environment that you're going to have to operate in.
They never understand Trump, and part of it is of course, because they hate him and so on and so forth. But sometimes and some are just making it up. I mean, they're making it up, they're pretending they don't understand it. But there are plenty of people in the media who I think that you can't fake it. They're just so dumb that even after all these years, they don't understand. Trump would be the happiest person if those 30,000 cells in Guantanamo didn't get filled because of the psychological effect of what he's done there. That would be option one. But they never think of it that way. They never report of it that way. They always think, oh my goodness, he's going to do this, he's going to do that. He's going to send all these people there. Oh, think of the children. It's just so dumb. On the tariffs as well.
But they're also carrying his message. There's an implicit threat with the media, crying about that whole issue to begin with. That has a very real impact at the ground level.
On the tariffs, it's exactly the same thing. Immediately, when the Colombians said, no, we're not taking back our own people, which, as you just said, in and of itself is just ludicrous. What did the left do? What did the media do? What did Democrats do? Immediately, they were like, oh my goodness, now you're going to have to pay more for your coffee because of Trump, and you're not going to have flowers for Valentine's because of Trump.
You're going to have to pay more for your roses.
First of all, aside from, we'll get back here to what Trump's actual thinking is and what his actual modus operandi is, which is super smart. But after 9-10 years, they still haven't figured it out. I think some of them really haven't. They're just really that dumb. First of all, if the tariffs had gone through, those kinds of products are easily substitutable. So what you then get is just the trade just gets shifted somewhere else. It's very simple. The coffee just comes from somewhere else. The flowers just come from somewhere else. So it's not going to be a problem the way they describe it. But leaving that aside, the whole point is Trump wasn't really interested in, he didn't really want to put on tariffs. He would if he had to. But he didn't really want to do that. He didn't really want to sanction all these people. He didn't really want to do all those things. He just wanted them to take their people back. That was the whole idea. And within half an hour or an hour or whatever it was, he achieved his goal. And there was no need for all these things. But again, media, Democrats, everyone, oh my goodness, you're going to have to pay more for your coffee. How dare Trump do this to us and so on. So I think some will just never, ever understand him. They will never understand the genius of what he does. They're so afflicted by their TDS. They will always just see this, the orange buffoon who just does stupid things all the time. They either are too dumb to understand, or they are so afflicted with TDS that they can't understand, or they won't let themselves understand. I don't know which one it is, but I don't think it's all pretend. Of course, there's many people who just scream anti-Trump stuff just because, right? Because it's anti-Trump and they know the truth. But I think a lot of them just simply don't understand. They're just that dumb. And if I have one wish to come out, well, I have many wishes, but one wish to come out of this is that we see the media, the people who do this, especially the really dumb ones who really don't get it, just whittle down, just get rid of them. Acosta is gone now at CNN, fantastic. Many others have been fired or let go or whatever over the past few months. I hope we see a lot more of that. If we end up with the leftist media just being the ones who pretend not to understand, just being basically the political operatives, that's fine, because we can see through that. We can deal with that, and maybe we'll end up in a position where that is going to be what's left. And I certainly hope that that's where we end up.
That whole issue has been just a perfect example of the public seeing through everything that they're trying to do, because all of those emotional appeals, none of them worked. They were roundly derided and dismissed. People are beginning, I think, to see the larger problem. And maybe I can just circle back real quick and kind of close on this. One thing I did want to mention, that some of the entities that were involved in driving these, NGOs that were involved in doing this, a large number of them trace back to the Catholic Church. Catholic Charities of America. And there's a lot of people that try to say, well, that's a separate entity that has nothing to do with the Catholic Church. And maybe on paper, that's even kind of correct, although from what I've seen, that's not true. But we've also come across very real directives from the Catholic Church and intermingling of the various local dioceses and the Catholic Charities of America. So there's been very much a grassroots effort, and they have focused on some of these Catholic institutions that have been very willing to act on the State Department's behalf and have been by far the largest recipient of these funds coming out of these agencies.
You know, remember the church that Trump went to? It was, I think, on his second day in office.
Yeah, the Episcopalian Church.
Yeah, and I know it's Anglican; it's not Catholic. And there was this bishop or whatever. I'm not, forgive me. I'm not perfectly familiar with all the right titles and all that kind of stuff. But she was this horrific woke person who just absolutely laid into Trump. And one of the first things I thought, and I understand it wasn't Catholic, but nonetheless, one of the first things I thought is, yeah, there's this wokeness. There are people who are so afflicted by TDS that they can't see the truth. Their brains don't function anymore. But it's also in many cases about money. Now, I don't know whether that's the case with that particular church, but we should never lose sight of the notion that with a lot of this anti-Trump stuff, it's not TDS. It's about money. It's because they were getting a whole bunch of money through one of these organizations into their so-called NGOs. And, that money spigot is now being turned off. So they're, angry.
I mean, we've identified something on the nature of 500, I don't know, what is it, close to $1 billion going to the Catholic Charities of America alone. I'm sure there's probably more behind that. So, I think your point is very well taken, and kind of circling back to some of the corruption that we've been talking about, that at the end of the day, for a lot of these people, that's exactly right. It's about money and, our money. I guess that's the more fundamental issue. It's about our money. And I think that's kind of what Trump is about, is sort of taking that power back, that yes, it is our money.